I'm a business consultant. I am also a tax strategist, and I've been in the finance industry for over 18 years. As a solopreneur, right, or someone who's an entrepreneur. Hello, Five Family. I am super excited about tonight because I have a special guest joining me again tonight. Definitely, if you tuned in last week, you know that we are still on this subject of compliance, especially for my small business owners. And so last week we talked about compliance as it relates to employees versus contractors. And tonight we have a special topic because we're going to be talking about compliance along the lines of the CTA. That's the Corporate Transparency Act. And this act is going to take effect in 2024, and it is going to affect most business owners, right? So I wanted to make sure that we brought on a special guest to talk more in detail about what this act is and what it means for business owners like you and me, all right? So again, before I get started, definitely let me reintroduce myself to those who are joining maybe for the first time, I should say, or introduce myself for those who are joining for the first time. My name is Smart Andrews. I am your resident tax strategist on the Tax Takeover, and every week we come before you with tax tips and strategies that you can implement in order to make sure you have the most tax advantageous outcome, right? That's what we're all about on the Tax Takeover. We have a model that the wealthy don't start tax planning once they become wealthy, but rather use tax planning as a tool to grow and protect their wealth. And so that's what the Tax Takeover is all about. Okay. All right. So great. So I'm super excited that you are here. Please make sure that you are super engaged in the comment section. So if you are here, give us a wave. Let us know that you are watching. Even tell us where you're watching from. That would be interesting as well. But make sure that you have your pens and your paper ready so that you can take great notes. And most importantly, if you have questions, make sure that you are putting your questions in the chat, and we will be sure to address them throughout the show tonight. All right. So without further ado, I want to bring to the stage our tax attorney, our expert for the evening, Lloyd. Welcome to the stage, Lloyd.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, it's super exciting to have you on. I love talking to attorneys and especially tax attorneys because
You
I
don't
feel
hear that
like,
very often.
right, we get each other, Lloyd. So I know tonight's show is going to be super engaging and definitely something that small business owners specifically need to know about because this is going to be something that's going to affect them most likely.
Absolutely, yes.
So
And it will
before,
be most.
right. So before we go any further, would you mind introducing yourself to the Five Finance family?
Absolutely. So I am Lloyd Money. I'm an associate attorney over at Wiggum Law, tax resolution attorneys. We specialize in dealing with both federal, state taxing authorities whenever you have a balance or are undergoing an examination. We can help you out. Um, Hopefully you don't find yourselves in that situation, but you know who to call if you do.
I love it. I love it. So we definitely will be sharing more information about Lloyd and how to contact him after the show. So make sure you stay until the end because I promise you, you're going to have some questions and you're going to want to reach out to an expert, right? So without further ado, Lloyd, I want us to jump right into it if you don't mind. So first and foremost, CTA, right? Corporate Transparency Act. I want to understand, and if you can explain to our viewers, like what are the requirements and how are they going to impact small businesses specifically?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like you said, relatively new act. The government is actually still in the process of fleshing out the regulations, the requirements. But big picture is it is going to impose a new filing requirement upon small business owners, most small business owners, and we can get into that a little bit more in depth here in a minute. But you will have to report certain information related to both your beneficial owners, and that's a defined term in the regulations, and the entity itself. This is something that currently you will have to file initially starting in January 1st of 2024, and really the time frame you have to comply is based on when the entity was established. So I'm happy to go into that a little bit further if you want to go into specifics. But for existing entities prior to this CTA and the requirements taking effect, you will have a full year to file this initial report.
Wow. Okay, so that's interesting. So you made a point that it's going to depend on when the entities were established. Do you mind giving us an example, like explaining to us what that means or what that looks like?
Yes, absolutely. So for the small business owner that has an entity already established,
Hmm.
going into 2024, you will have a full year to file, as I previously mentioned. However, if you are thinking about establishing an entity sometime on January 1st of 2024 or after, your time frame to file this report to maintain compliance with these new regulations is a lot shorter. And right now, I believe it's 30 days that they're giving you to file that from the date that you receive confirmation your entity's been established with the respective Georgia Secretary of State. So there may be a little delay there depending on when you actually receive your confirmation, but time frame is much shorter, and it's definitely something to be aware of when planning to start your new entity.
Wow, that is interesting. So this is going to be yet another requirement, small business owners, that you're going to have to be on the lookout for. So it's going to be imperative that you're working with a tax attorney, even your accountant, I'm sure is aware of these changes, these requirements that are up and coming. I know I was, which is why I wanted to make sure I did a show about it so that you understand the importance, because I'm sure if you do not file, there's going to be some consequences for not being compliant. Is that correct, Lloyd?
That is absolutely correct. And they are hefty fines, penalties. Additionally, they've made it a crime in certain instances. So you can
Oh,
be
wow.
charged right now, it's stating max term is up to 2 years for willful failures.
Wow. And it's interesting that this is coming about just now. Do you have any more background as to why this act is being formed? Like what made them like decide to implement this act?
So I'm actually very happy you asked that question. Very interesting. The CTA and the regulations imposing this filing requirement stem from a larger government mandate that started just about a year earlier in 2020. And in the public law notes and comments, it seemed like the government sought to address certain foreign crimes, money laundering, malfeasance of foreign operatives that they had become aware of. And it, I mean, I'm sure you've seen it in the news recently. They even cited the Ukrainian conflict currently and certain Russian elites, people of power over there that had utilized American LLCs and entities to launder funds. And there are a lot of references to Russia in the comments and notes, but especially now, it is very relevant. And this is one of the steps the US has taken to basically compile a repository, a database that both FinCEN and law enforcement can utilize to try and combat some of these criminal acts.
Wow, that is very interesting. And I figured that there was something behind them making this a big push. And I also want to be clear, people. I don't believe this is the Internal Revenue Service, right? This is another agency that is pushing this agenda.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. So it is still under the umbrella of the Department of the Treasury, but this is,
Right.
and it's FinCEN for short. It's the Financial Crimes Enforcement Division. So really, you would see, and we'll discuss penalties a little bit in more detail, but very similar, I would say, in how they operate, imposing penalties. Still Department of the Treasury, but it is a different department.
Yep. Yep. So again, small business owners, right? You definitely want to make sure that you are going to be in compliant and making your requirements and filing. So tell us a little bit more about that if you can, Lloyd. Like, what is going to be the expectation as far as like where do they file? Like, where do they file? Like, is it going to be an application that they have to fill out? Is it going to be annually? Like,
Right. So right now, it is just your initial filing, and then there is a requirement that you file an updated report, once again, within 30 days of any changes to your initial report. And I'll go through, if you don't mind, some of the information included on that
please.
initial report, and then, we can discuss when that updated requirement or updated report filing requirement is imposed. So you will end up having to file a report initially stating certain information about the beneficial owners, including name, birth date, address, and they do include a unique identifying number, which they give you multiple methods. It could be something like the driver's license number. It could be something like your passport identification number. It could also be a FinCEN provided identification number. Um, with that information, you will actually have to provide to FinCEN a copy of whatever identification method you've chosen to utilize. So it is, a relatively personal disclosure on that front. After you disclose beneficial owners, whether it be you individually or multiple, you do have to include certain information related to the entity itself. Full legal name, any trade names, if you're doing business as something else, you have to include that. Principal place of business, where your entity is formed, just the jurisdiction, and then your taxpayer identification
Mm,
number.
okay. So it sounds like this is pretty much the information that you would have when you went to set up your entity anyway, right? With your different state agencies and or with the Internal Revenue Service. So a lot of this information you would just be taking from those documents, it sounds like, and then putting it into the system for SINFIN. Is that correct?
Absolutely. I
Okay,
think the majority of business owners will have this information
right,
readily available. You might
right.
have to do some digging to find a passport, but it is not something you're going to have to request from third parties in most instances.
Okay, all
At
right.
least I think.
Right. From what you explained as some of the requirements, I know that easily I can go grab all of those documents.
Yeah, I
So,
have got it in my pocket right now.
exactly, exactly. So, again, it's really trying to crack down on those persons who are creating entities to launder money, hide money from different government agencies. I get it. I get it. Okay, so now that we understand the requirements and you gave us an understanding of the deadlines and we have an understanding that hey, we're going to have to do this once and then have to maybe refresh again. I think you said like after you do the initial filing, then we may have to do another filing. Um, so are there any exceptions though? Are any in place for small business owners?
There are, and
Okay.
there's actually, I believe it's 23 enumerated exceptions,
Okay.
some of those being publicly traded companies. They do have companies that file reports with the SEC, certain insurance companies. So there are enumerated exceptions that will be important to look at. and most of them did not seem to apply to small business owners, unfortunately. There is more of a broader exception when, under the regulation, you qualify as a larger entity, and that would be something who employs over 20 or over full-time employees, has gross receipts over $5 million dollars in the prior year, has filed an income tax return, a U.S. income tax return within the past year. So it has certain requirements and will be difficult to access for many small business owners. Now, it will be very important for the small business owner to actually review the regulations and determine whether they are required to report in the first place. The definition itself is relatively broad. It does cover corporations, it covers LLCs, and then it casts a little bit of a wider net stating any entity that is formed by filing documentation with the Secretary of State in the respective jurisdiction will end up being or falling under that reporting agency or reporting entity umbrella. And we're in Georgia, so I've got that information. But in other states, if viewers are from other states, it'll be important to look at that as well to see what your state actually requires.
Right. And so it's interesting that you said that because on our show, I think it was 2 weeks ago now, we were talking about the different types of entities, right? And so a sole prop is not necessarily an entity that you have to register, not in the state of Georgia, right? Like you can just start going into business, file a Schedule C, you're considered a sole prop, right? However, is if you register with the Secretary of State, it sounds like you're putting yourself in a position where you will most likely have to abide by these requirements. But I wonder, is a sole prop an exception? Like if you don't have a business entity that's registered with your Secretary of State?
Absolutely. And in
Mm,
earlier versions, sole proprietors were actually mentioned by name as being something that does not currently need to report. There were several updated versions of that regulation. So at this point, may no longer be mentioned by name. It's something to be aware of, keep your eye on. Another thing to be aware of, like I said, is FinCEN thus far has only finalized one of three anticipated regulations. And they have already noted the fact that going forward, it may be necessary to start requiring that sole proprietors file these BOI reports. And I think this is going to be a learning period for them, a little bit of a testing period. The initial wave of reporters will be a little bit of a guinea pig in this circumstance, but I think that is kind of the case with a lot of these regulations. Nothing
yeah.
to be worried about, just be aware.
Right, right. And that's exactly the purpose of this conversation tonight, right, Lloyd? Like, I want to make sure that my audience was aware of what is going on because it may affect you, right? Or it may not, but still, definitely, I want to make sure that they are aware of what is taking place, like what's in the pipeline, so to speak. So it's interesting that they initially called out so props, like, we're not after them.
Right.
But
And
go ahead.
it makes a lot of sense, but especially since it's not even really necessary, you have an EIN in each instance, it's
Right.
really just passing through to the individual.
Yep.
But it's interesting they addressed it, and
Right.
I have not seen the final determination yet. So it's definitely important for everybody to stay up to date with these ever changing regulations and requirements
Yes.
that could be imposed on you.
Yeah, they definitely don't make my job easy.
They do not. They do not.
Definitely not. And it's interesting also that another entity that they called out were C Corps or publicly traded entities. Um, I have like my reasoning as to why I think that they're not going to be within this requirements, because there's another requirement, another entity that they answer to, like the Securities and Exchange Commission, if you're publicly traded. So they're already regulating them, right? And so I feel like they're like, we got them covered. But for the other organizations, like your partnerships or your S corps, right? Your smaller businesses, then they're not necessarily being regulated at such a standard as those publicly traded entities. At least that's just my take on it. I could be totally wrong, but I just feel like that could be a reason why they kind of called them out.
No, I think you're absolutely correct. And just to clarify, C corporations, I believe, are required to. It's the publicly traded. And I think just going back to the whole purpose of these new requirements, they're trying to have information available. And at least in the instances of the exceptions, that information is already available. Not to us in some cases, but it's out there. The government would have access to it. Right now, they're trying to obtain information that is not readily available, that they would not have to go to extraordinary lengths to obtain. And they reference some of the steps they had to take to get some of this information, even when they were aware of an alleged crime. They had to issue subpoenas, jump through hoops, and I understand from their perspective why they would want something like this. It's just unfortunate. It put the burden on the taxpayer in this
Right.
case.
Yep. And it's some, I feel like that happens more often than not. Right? The
You're
burden is on the taxpayer, right? So now that we understand like what it is, what our requirements are, who it's going to affect, I would love for you to help our small business owners in understanding if there are any steps that we can take now to prepare ourselves for the CTA requirements that will go into effect probably as early as January, right, of 2024.
Yeah, absolutely. So just going back to the information that's required on the report, I think this is one of those reports that it will not be difficult to compile the information that you need. But I think in this case, it would be extremely helpful just to reach out to your preparer, or if you prep your returns individually, just so everyone is aware of this new reporting requirement and will be ready to move at relatively quickly, get the electronic report filed online, and reach compliance. This is something that just personally I would probably try and knock out sooner rather than later, receive confirmation it's been filed, and then you would just have to monitor for any updates in the information so that you can file and update a report later. And for some people, that may not even occur. This could be a one-time filing and you'll be in compliance if there are no changes.
That's very, very good sound advice. I hope that you heard that, Five Finance family. So you definitely want to be proactive with this, right? Try to get as much information put together as possible. Lloyd did an amazing job with going through some of the documentation that is going to be requested when you are completing this application. And I love the fact that you can do it electronically. That's even better for small business owners, because they're on the go, they're busy. So the more accessible that they are to these forms, I think it's going to be better off, and for the agency too, to receive the information that they're looking for in a timely manner. So thank you for sharing that. So do you foresee though any potential challenges or difficulties for small businesses in meeting the requirements?
So meeting the requirements is not necessarily something I foresee issues with, just given the information at hand for many small business owners will be readily accessible. Here, this is something where the proposed regulations for the second and third round are in their infancy stages, have not been finalized. FinCEN, the U.S. government has basically noted already that there are going to be changes and that they're aware there could be changes going forward. And it's going to be a changing landscape that business owners are going to have to monitor. So it's another ongoing task that business owners are going to have to really pay attention to over the course of the next several months until the regulations are finalized. Hopefully, could be longer, but it is, once again, the burden is placed on the business owner,
Right.
and
Yep.
I think that's the big difficulty here. There are a lot of unknowns, even going down to smaller pieces of this regulation and compliance. I haven't seen a completed version of the form. You can't access the online version until January of 2024. So it is something that everybody is going to have to stay up to date with.
Yeah, and I'm glad you keep saying that. Like, stay up to date on these things. So, like, what are some sites then? Can you advise our small business owners to go to so that they can stay informed on these changes or these updates around this whole CTA?
Yeah, absolutely. So actually, FinCEN does an unbelievable job of promulgating material, and they include the regulations, which are large, dry documents. Feel free to read those, but then they boil it down into small business owner guides. They've got a relatively short compared to the regulation PDF available online for free that states your requirements, goes through various tests that you can run against your own entity to determine if you will be required to report and the information you'd be required to report. I was blown away by the documentation and resources that they placed or that they made available, honestly.
Awesome. And so, Five Finance Family will be sure to put those links in the description of this video so that you guys can have a place to go to directly. Click on those links, learn more about the CTA, and understand what the requirements are going to be, and see if you're going to be an entity that is required to report when this thing goes live. So again, Lloyd, thank you. You have been a wealth of knowledge. I know that our audience was truly blessed to have you on and share this valuable information, especially since it's going to be affecting so many businesses in 2024. And you have some businesses that are, kind of doing it alone, right? Some businesses are not in a position where they have a tax preparer, right? Or an accountant or a CPA or an enrolled agent even, that they can, go to and help guide them through these things. So I'm so grateful that you were giving, those people, some information as well. Like, here's how you can kind of do it yourself, right? If you're in a position where you have to do that. So thank you so much for that. So again, I want to make sure that the people know how to get in contact with you. So are you on LinkedIn?
I am, yes, LinkedIn, great way to reach me.
Okay, perfect. And we have Lois LinkedIn up right now. You work for the Wiggum Law Firm, so y'all can see a attorney associate, right? Tax associate, right? So definitely make sure that you contact Lloyd. I would definitely follow Lloyd. He probably shares a lot of good content and information on his LinkedIn as well. But we definitely appreciate you taking the time to chat with us this evening and sharing this great content with the Five Finance family. We really appreciate it, Lori.
Oh, it was my pleasure, and thank you for having me.
Yeah, no worries. Any last words you want to share before we log off?
No, but once again, reach out with any questions. I'm happy to do the best I can via LinkedIn. In the event you do have any tax related issues, feel free to reach out.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you so much, Lord. All right, so I'm going to ask you to wait backstage while I wrap up this show. All right, Five Finance family. So thank you so much for tuning in tonight. I hope again that you found this to be very informative. Lloyd did an amazing job with walking us through the requirements, what the CTA was, when it's going to be going into effect. Again, we're going to make sure that we have those links in the description of the video so that you can access that information and just be proactive, Finance family. Get above, get before this thing, get ahead of this thing, and make sure that you are reading through the requirements and seeing if you are going to be one of those entities or taxpayer that is going to be required to file this information. So again, thank you for tuning in tonight. I hope that you found this very informative, and if you did, please make sure you are sharing it. Make sure that you are also subscribing to our channel. And while you are subscribing, make sure you hit that notification bell so that you never miss an episode. As you can see, we bring you some informative content that you can implement for the benefit of your business. All right. Make sure that you are also following us on LinkedIn. Okay, so you can definitely follow me under Samara M. Andrews. And we also share great content there as well. So keep us engaged on LinkedIn as well. And last but not least, if you want to connect with me personally, you want to book a strategy call with me, make sure that you are visiting my website, www.5finance.com, and you can schedule a consultation, and I will be more than happy to get on a call with you, and we can complete a tax strategy that is suited just for you, right? So again, Finance family, I enjoyed the conversation we had with Lloyd. He was truly a wealth of knowledge, so I know you enjoyed it as well. Thank you for being so engaging in the comments. But until next time, happy tax planning and have a blessed and prosperous Tuesday. See ya.